To jest festiwal EnergaCAMERIMAGE w Toruniu, and our guest is director Joel Souza. Hello, Joel.
Hello.
How are you? Everything okay?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Enjoying time in Toruniu?
Oh, it's beautiful. Love it. Yeah.
It is. I agree.
Yeah. No, I've never been. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I've seen your film, Rust, and the first thing I want to ask you is that there are a couple, I mean, in the beginning already, there are a couple of scenes, a couple of shots that immediately take me back to a tradition of Western, classic Western films, like the first shot of the close-up of the eyes.
Yeah.
I immediately thought about Sergio Leone. There is a shot through the door, which immediately took me back to John Ford.
Yeah.
And I would ask you about, was it conscious on your part to actually set this film in this, great tradition of the genre using these kind of shots?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. In fact, the door shot, we said it's time to do the searchers.
Yeah, exactly.
Time for the searchers, you know. And but no, we did that a lot, and that that was on my mind with the opening shot of the eyes with Leone, who was such a genius. And I love classic westerns. Shane is among my favorites. I think I guess Unforgiven is old enough at this point you can call it a classic, or maybe it was
it's a brilliant film.
A classic from the moment it was born. But those were very much on my mind. I loved the classic Western imagery, but I loved the revisionist take. The questions about violence and its place in the Old West and what it cost people and the consequences that it left behind. But I think visually, we wanted to be, in a sense, we wanted to sort of take a step back a little bit, let the frame breathe a little bit, give our actors room to move within it in an interesting way, especially where we film like New Mexico and Montana. There's a theory where you could sort of close your eyes, spin around in a circle, open your eyes, in whichever direction you were pointing, you would have something amazing to look at.
Yeah.
Westerns are like that.
Yeah.
And so I knew we couldn't really go wrong with that. It was just a matter of, how are we going to frame this? What are we trying to say when we do? And trying to make those moments count. We're not just going to have somebody framed in the doorway for no reason, just as some strange homage or something like that. It still had to make sense in what we were trying to come across thematically. So,
you mentioned revisionist westerns, or as they sometimes called anti-westerns.
Yeah.
The ones that really challenged the mythology of the western.
Yeah.
Talking about Sam Peckinpah, for example, of course, Arthur Penn, but also Clint Eastwood with his The Unforgiven. And I really think there is a kinship there between your film and these kind of films, even in a moral, ethical terms, because you mentioned violence. These are the films that really are very often morality tales, or tales that ask questions about revenge and violence and the moral compass of it all. So I guess this was something. I think that this was something also that you were interested in.
Oh, from Jump Street, just from the writing of it. I'm interested in the shades of gray, the in-between. There's this quote that I remember, the good men, the bad men, and the rest of us in between. There's the white hats, the black hats, and we're all somewhere there. We have elements of all that in us. And I think when I wrote the characters, I was very interested in they're sort of archetypal characters, right? There's the young kid on the run, the marshal who's going to go get his man, the old man gunslinger, the evil man pursuing them all. But I wanted to take and turn those on their head a little bit, and just sort of, like, the marshal is not this, what you might consider I think some people might consider that, going after the outlaw is a brave thing, but in his personal life, he's not a brave man. And that's his failing. And, the old man who comes to rescue his grandson has had so many personal failings in his life, and his reasoning for wanting to come help this boy, he probably couldn't even put into words. And I think just sort of trying to make the people feel as realistic as possible is important. But I think, these sort of the white hat, black hat kind of westerns, while I love those, it's not for me personally, but I can adore to watch them, like Silverado is that, and it's one of my all-time favorites. And to an extent,
they're also very good films.
Yeah, and they're amazing. And but I think that's where a movie like Shane is really interesting to me, and that it has the artifice of this white hat, black hat western, but it is in fact not even remotely that.
Yeah.
I mean, Shane to me just changed everything for Westerns.
You mentioned the archetypes and the evil bounty hunter that pursues our characters. Of course, like you say, it's an archetype. You can think about Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West, for example. Yeah. But at the same time, I also think that you took a lot of time in the film to actually establish all the characters. I never felt that even the evil bounty hunter, it doesn't, he's not only an evil bounty hunter, there's more to him.
No, he doesn't think he's evil, right?
Listen, he's a complicated man. But but what I think is that you are not hurrying up in this film with your exposition and with your establishing of the characters of the story. And that's why I think that every character is really fleshed out, and I guess that's also something you wanted to do.
No, I appreciate that. I'm more interested in character than I am in plot. Not necessarily story. I don't consider plot and story necessarily the same thing. I think characters are story. And I like to really just sort of dive in and figure out what makes people tick. And that character is very specifically interesting in that while does these vile things, he's also...
The bounty hunter, you mean.
The bounty hunter, he's also remarkably polite. Which to me is even more off-putting.
Yes.
But even a lot of that came from the actor Travis Fimmel's input into the character. We had a real partnership in sort of the creation of that character. But what I like to do, I just really get sort of carried away with character, and I like to give actors a lot to hold on to and a lot to do. Like, if an actor's going to come in as a day players are some of my favorite actors in the world. Because with me, they're going to get a meaty scene that's a 5-minute scene that they're going to really get to, that could almost exist as its own vignette outside of the movie. And I like doing that a lot. I feel like there's probably a lot of that in this movie.
Yeah, but you're right that his politeness is...
He's so polite.
Even more off-putting.
Yeah.
I thought about this story about Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski on the set of one of their films when Klaus Kinski went into his rage and was shouting at Herzog for like 20 minutes or something, and Herzog was just sitting in silence.
Yeah.
And people said that this silence was much more frightening
than Kinski.
And
that's saying something, by the way, because he was scary as hell.
But he is actually like that, this character of bounty hunter, that his politeness is his calmness is even more...
Yeah, those characters are fun to write because he's also so verbose and flowery in his language and almost poetic in his language. And it's like, I think he believes the thing he's saying.
Yeah, and that's also frightening.
Yeah.
Also, I think one of the interesting themes in your film is about justice and about legal system or legalism, if you want. Is everything that is legal actually moral? And this is something that is really interesting for me because what the marshal does in this film, it's legal. He's like... he's enforcing the law.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even he has some doubts that if he's doing the right thing.
No, and I think it was a fun character to write because, he's sort of a legendary figure in his world. People know who he is, the way he operates. He's apprehended all these men, but he's a man who lost his faith at some point in his life and had nothing to hold on to after that. And all he had to hold on to after that was the job, the law enforcement. And then when he realized that anything he did made no difference, all these men he apprehended, it didn't do any good. And the world stayed violent. And I think his character has an enormous difficulty grappling with that. And I think the movie itself talks about that a lot. That was an interesting era in American history in that, in America now, there's probably a law about tying your shoes. But there was, there's not a lot that was against the law back then. I mean, there were instances where killing someone was legal, and if you had reason, and especially out in the West, where there weren't sort of a lot of, in the territorial days, when there weren't a lot of established governments and towns didn't maybe have law enforcement, it's just, you lived by your wits. If you had a gun, you had to protect yourself with it. And it was just you against everybody trying to take what you had and the world trying to swallow you up because it didn't want you there.
Yeah.
It was an interesting era. And so the idea of, just come back sort of the idea of justice, I don't quite know what that is. I don't know what deserve means in the context of this movie. I like to think that at the end of this movie, every character gets what they quote unquote deserve, for good or bad. And but I grapple with what that means sometimes.
Yeah, and even the beginning of the film, when I think about it, is that when this boy, Lucas, when he is sentenced to death by hanging.
Yeah.
You're like, immediately you're like, in the beginning of the film, you're like, is this really... And of course, we're seeing it through the lens of today, of our contemporary Western world, when we see it as barbaric.
But that kind of thing happened.
Yeah, I know.
It did.
But it immediately, provokes the questions in your head. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember reading about one of the youngest people the legal system ever hung in this country was 14, and that is fascinating that could even be conceived of back then. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I think the kid, he is sort of a vehicle for. The kid is sort of so weighed down by miseries in his life, right? Mm-hmm. And all these sort of unfairnesses that come upon him. I think it was a tough role, let's say, for Patrick, but he came through. Yeah,
the world just falls down on him in the beginning of the film.
Everything collapses on top of him. Nothing is fair, nothing. But what is fair?
Yeah, but also you titled the film. The film is titled Rust, after the character that Alec Baldwin played.
Yeah.
So, in your mind, was that character, the character of Harland Rust, sort of a center of the film in terms of what you wanted to say?
Well, I mean, the boy to me is the most central character, but the relationship between a boy and a grandfather is something that means a great deal to me. Now, it doesn't come through in any kind of traditional way in this movie. It's a very strange relationship initially. The boy doesn't even know who he is, and it's very dangerous, and the old man is very rough with him. But I was really, really close with my grandfather, as I think a lot of us probably were, or lucky enough to be, frankly. And my grandfather loved Westerns, and so that was originally why I even made a Western. But I think what's central to it is the relationship between the grandfather and his grandson, and how they get to know each other, and how they bring things out on each other, and how it forces the old man to reckon with his past. The kid gets a look. It's interesting. So there's the kid, and then there's the marshal, the old man, the murderer, and the bounty hunter. And I think each of those characters represent a possible future for the kid. That's sort of what I intended. He could be like his grandfather. He could be like the marshal. He could be like the bounty hunter, who just is a nihilist and has given up on things in life. But I think by the end, what we realize is the kid is actually choosing to be his own man, and he's a better man than any of those other three, even at 13.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.